Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I'll be continuing the series on combat. As you can see, I have a group combat set up here between some sort of generic enemies and some player characters. It looks just the same as it did last video, but if you saw last video, you might notice that there is a new message, a new type of message. It says, you have the initiative. Click on an enemy to have Bold Cypress Tree attack them. Bold Cypress Tree is just the name that I gave to the leftmost player character. And you'll also notice that the mouse pointer, if I move it over one of the enemies, this is not true of the player characters, but if I move it over one of the enemies, it will turn into a sort of glove icon which indicates that if you click on it, it'll have some effect. So if I choose, let's say I choose enemy 5, then it gives me the message, Bold Cypress Tree strikes at enemy 5, it misses, click on an enemy to have She is Brave, attack them, She is Brave is this one here. So similarly, we can go through, she misses as well. The elf hits for 6 damage, and then finally the last player character there hits and manages to kill the enemy. And then we see that it's the enemy's turn because everyone's had a go, and they all get to attack. You notice that, so that was enemy 4 who struck and misses. You'll notice that it skips enemy 5, of course, because enemy 5 is dead. And now it's our initiative again, and so on. So in other words, we can have both sides now have the ability to attack each other. So let's have a look at the code that made that possible. And there's surprisingly little code necessary to add this ability, because the way that we've coded an attack, it works the same for player characters and enemies. It's just that there's some variables here that say, so $AT is the side that's currently attacking, 0 is the player characters and 1 is enemies, $DE is the side which is defending. We could have got away with just having a single variable for attacker and defender, but I found it a bit easier to follow if we had 2. And then we have $CA, which is within the side that's attacking, what's the number of the character that's currently attacking, and then $Z is the equivalent for the defending, who's being attacked. And so in order to change it from the monsters attacking to the player characters attacking the monsters, we just need to change these variables, and we also need to give the player the choice of which monster the player character is going to attack. If you were here last time, you might remember that I had a page set up called PC, which was going to be the code where the player chose their target. We have this page enemy and target, and that's where the computer works out who the monsters are going to choose to attack. And so I thought we're going to need a page for the player characters, but actually we don't. We do it in display. And the way that we do it is that if it's relevant, if it's the player character's attack and a given enemy is still alive and therefore a potential target, then we make that picture a link. So I'll show you the relevant bit of code. This is the bit of code which prints the pictures of the enemies, and it looks at one of 3 possibilities. It sets up in order to stop, because they all had this bit at the beginning, the div title equals, and then X. X is the variable that happens in this hover text. It's the stuff like, it might be enemy 4, and then a line break, and then attack bonus plus 0, and then a line break, and then I can't remember the exact order, but something like that. So rather than print that 3 different times, I had a temporary variable which is W, which starts with that value, and at the end we print W, and I'll show you how that works. So we start with the div title equals quote, and then everything that's in the hover text, end quote, and title just means that that thing will come up when you move your mouse pointer over it, and then it looks at one of three possibilities. If $H1Z is less than 1, in other words, if the enemy is dead, then we need to have this command which prints the picture awkd, which is just the picture of the monster with a red cross in front of it to indicate that it's dead. Or, if that's not the case, then if $AT equals 1, which means the monsters are attacking, therefore we don't want to make any of the pictures a link, because the player doesn't have any choices when they're being attacked, they just get the message as to what happened. Well, then we print very similar to this, except instead of awkd, we print just awk, which is the picture of the living enemies. Or, and this is the change, we have this code, and I'll write out what that would look like. It'll be something like img art/awk.png n square bracket strike n square bracket $Z to, for example, 4. Z, this $Z here, is just the is governed by this for loop, which goes from 1 to $E, which is the number of enemies. So this is just the number of the current enemy that we're printing out. So we have, this is a more complicated version of the img command. The first bit, the first set of square brackets, is just the location and name of the file that we want to print. The second bit here is a link. It goes to the page strike. And the third thing is setting a variable, set the variable Z to the value 4. And we can have more than one variable here. You could have any number of x2, etc., etc. You could have any number of variables, but in this case we're only doing one. So in other words, it's saying here's a picture, print the picture art/awk.png and make it a link, and if the player clicks it, go to strike and set $Z to 4. Strike is the code that governs randomizing whether a hit hits, and if it does hit, what the damage is. So it generates a random number from 1 to 20 and adds the relevant attack bonus. Then it compares it to the relevant armor class, and if it's equal to or greater than the armor class, it's a hit, and therefore we need to generate damage, and otherwise it's a miss. And that's really all we need to do. We just we do that for every living enemy, and they're all links, and then the player will click on the one that they want, and it'll go to strike and make whatever updates are needed depending on the result of the random roll, and then it will move on to the next attacker. $CA plus plus means add 1 to $CA. $CA stands for current attacker, and it's the whoever's currently up next to attack. And then I'll go through this quickly because we did deal with it in the last video. But if we've dealt with every attacker, then we need to change those variables so that the current attacker becomes 1, and $AT and $DE swap places to show that now it's the monster's turn, or all the monsters have gone and now it's the enemy's turn. And that's really all the changes we needed to make, other than before I had it set up so that $AT always started at 1, which meant that the monsters always had the first attack, but I've just set it back to how we had it before when it was a single combat. which is that $AT is randomly set to either 0 or 1. So the enemy and the monsters have a equal chance of having the first hit. And of course, in your game, you might have particular circumstances where that's not true. You might have a particular point in the story where the player characters are ambushed and therefore the enemy gets the first go automatically. You might have other situations where the player characters are ambushing their enemies and therefore they have the first go. But I've set up the sort of what might be the default case, which is that it's random. You might also have player characters having special attributes that make it more likely that they'll win initiative and so on. But I'm setting up the most sort of basic situation, which is that it's random who gets the initiative. And so combat will keep going. The enemies will all have their go, and then the player characters will all have their go, and then it'll go back to the enemy. What we haven't done yet is the end of combat. Eventually, of course, one side will all be dead, or the enemies might decide to run away if we decide to have that as an option, or the player characters might decide, or the player might decide that the player characters want to run away if we have that as an option. So that's what we need to code next. We have had those options when we had it set up as a single combat with one player character and one enemy, but I removed those in order to build up group combat and to make it as simple as possible. So the next thing we need to do is to put those things back in, put in at least a check if one side has been wiped out and the combat's over, and also if we want to have those options, to have the option that the enemies run away or the option that the player characters run away. So that's what we'll be covering in videos to come. But I hope that what I covered today was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.